Have you ever wondered if success is truly what you expected? What happens when we achieve all of our goals, but still feel empty, distant from the people around us? As if something is missing, but we don't exactly know what it is. Often, we spend our lives chasing recognition, power, or status, without realizing that what really matters is something simpler, something that cannot be bought. Ethan, a successful businessman at 45, seemed to have everything anyone could dream of: a thriving company, a stunning house, and a life filled with important events and meetings. But inside, he was lost. Every day, when he entered his luxurious office, a sense of disconnection overtook him. He had everything the world deems valuable, but it seemed like something was missing. The people around him were polite and respectful, but there was an almost palpable distance between them. Ethan found himself surrounded by admirers and colleagues, but he felt a deep loneliness, as if he were looking at the world from the outside, trapped in a bubble of perfection that did not touch his soul. Enter Sophia, a humble maid who arrives early and leaves late every day, taking care of the corners that no one else notices. She is discreet, silent, and dedicated, but there is something in her that catches Ethan's attention. Unlike everyone else, Sophia treats each person with the same dignity, regardless of status or position. She doesn't care about what people have or don't have. Her presence is simple, but full of something Ethan can't identify, but feels deeply. While most people around Ethan behave in a cold and calculating manner, Sophia is genuine. She smiles without expectations, listens with empathy, and, more than anything, treats everyone as if they were important, wanting nothing in return. This humility doesn't go unnoticed by Ethan, who begins to wonder, why is she so different from everyone else? One of those days, as Ethan was lost in his own thoughts, he crossed paths with Sophia. She was sweeping the hallway, focused on her work. When their gazes met, there were no words, nothing was said. But in that instant, something unusual happened, something neither Ethan nor Sophia could explain. In a simple glance, something changed. A silent yet deep connection formed between them. It was as if, without words, they had shared an unspoken truth, an understanding that transcended everything around them. For Ethan, it felt like he had suddenly woken up from a long sleep. Something new, something unexpected, was forming within him. He didn't know what it was, but he felt a lightness, a curiosity, a sense that something was about to change in his life. As he walked away, a persistent thought echoed in his mind. Is there something more that I'm searching for? Something I'm missing, and I don't even know what it is? That silent exchange of glances, simple and unpretentious, had ignited a flame in Ethan's heart. Could that glance, without words, be the beginning of a transformation? What could two such different beings teach each other? How could a wealthy businessman and a humble, yet wise, woman find something in common and help each other grow? If you've ever felt that life has something more to offer, something beyond what the eyes can see, like this video, comment below with what you think destiny is trying to teach you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this transformational story. Let's discover together what happens when two souls meet in an unlikely way. After that first silent encounter, Ethan found himself thinking about Sophia more than he would like to admit. It wasn't just the exchanged glance, but something deeper, an indescribable feeling that drew him to her. He began observing her from afar, always attentive to her gestures, her discreet and serene presence. What fascinated him most was her calm. In the midst of a frenetic corporate environment, with busy and distracted people, Sophia moved with a lightness that seemed to defy the chaos around her. She wasn't in a rush, didn't seem to be in a hurry. Her movements, simple and natural, radiated a peaceful energy Ethan had never experienced before, even amidst the luxury and rush that made up his life. There was something in the way she cleaned, as if every action had a greater purpose, like a moving meditation. He saw her bend gracefully to pick something up from the floor, or simply offer a discreet smile to someone passing by, expecting nothing in return. For Ethan, this was something completely new. He was used to seeing people chasing status, always eager for recognition, but Sophia seemed to live in a different world. A world where the little things, the simplest gestures, held more value than any prize or achievement. And the more he watched her, the more he wondered, what is this energy she radiates? How can someone so simple, so discreet, have this inner peace that we all search for but can't find? It wasn't just Sophia's natural beauty that began to attract Ethan. Contrary to what he might have expected, it wasn't just her sweet smile or the sparkle in her eyes that drew him in. What truly intrigued him was the way she saw the world, how she lived her life in a way so different from anything he had ever known. She seemed not to care about the things he valued so much: power, money, prestige, while he was constantly chasing unattainable goals, always in search of more. Sophia seemed to have already found her balance, her peace. There was no desperation in her actions, no rush to be recognized or admired. She didn't need more than what she had, yet her presence seemed to fill any emptiness he felt. Ethan began paying attention to the little details: how she spoke to others, how she treated everyone with kindness, how her empathy overflowed in every gesture. He noticed how she really listened, how she seemed to understand the needs of the people around her without them saying a word. The way she saw the world, with a clarity and simplicity he never imagined possible, made him question everything he had built. He found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just what she did or what she represented, but the way she seemed to have found a truth he, despite all his success, was still searching for. He wanted to understand more, to know how she managed to live with such serenity while he was lost in a sea of expectations and responsibilities. While Ethan observed Sophia, she, in turn, was aware of her place in the world and the distance that had always existed between them. She wasn't naive. She knew he was an important man, with a life full of responsibilities and privileges she could never imagine having. He was someone who inhabited a different universe, a world where the rules were different, where the value of people seemed to be tied to what they owned or what they could offer. Sophia knew her role in that company and in Ethan's life. She was the maid, the person doing the invisible work, the one everyone saw but didn't truly notice. She had no illusions about what she was to him, a distant figure, probably someone he would never see as anything more than a simple employee. She didn't feel inferior to him, but she knew that, in many ways, their lives were completely different, and that made her keep her distance. Although it was impossible to deny the silent connection that had formed between them, Sophia didn't allow herself to entertain hopes or fantasies. She knew Ethan's life was far from simple. He was a man surrounded by people and expectations, a figure of authority. And she, though attracted to the way he looked at her, knew he would never see her as anything more than a peripheral figure in his life. She wasn't looking to be seen or recognized. Her place was there, in her humility, and she was content with that. To her, the businessman was an unattainable figure, someone from a world so far from hers that it seemed impossible to imagine any kind of real connection. She knew that, no matter how much he admired her, there were invisible barriers that could never be overcome. Ethan was deeply moved by Sophia's tranquility and worldview, but she, aware of her reality, remained distant. How could two such different people connect in a real way, and what would that mean for their lives? Would the barriers separating their worlds be an insurmountable obstacle or a path to an unexpected transformation? What do you think will happen next? Is destiny trying to bring these two souls together? Let's discover together in the next chapters of this journey of change. After weeks of observing Sophia from a distance, Ethan began to feel an increasing need to approach her. At first, he tried to disguise this impulse, convincing himself that his curiosity about her was just a passing phase. But over time, it became clear that he couldn't shake the image of her from his mind. Something inside him had been awakened, and he didn't know how to control this new feeling. Ethan began to subtly, yet noticeably, change his routine. He spent more time in the hallways, making sure to walk around the office or enter areas he usually avoided. Every move he made had the intention of crossing Sophia's path, seemingly casually, but with a latent desire to have a conversation, to exchange words with her. At first, it was just an excuse, a document to deliver, a question about the cleaning of a space, or even a comment about the weather. But every interaction, even the simplest ones, began to fuel a growing curiosity. With each small encounter, his interest in Sophia intensified. He wanted to know more, to understand what lay behind that shy smile, that silent energy he couldn't decipher. It was on a calm afternoon, when the office was quieter, that Ethan had a conversation with Sophia that would change everything. He was leaving a meeting, a bit tired, and decided to take a walk down the hall. As usual, Sophia was there, doing her work. He stopped and, as always, asked a question about a small detail she was taking care of, something that seemed insignificant. But instead of the simple, straightforward answer he expected, Sophia began speaking in an unexpected way. She started explaining what it meant to her to keep the environment clean and organized, how it impacted the energy of the place and the people. For Ethan, these words seemed simple, but at the same time, profoundly revealing. He was surprised by the clarity and depth of her thinking. Sophia spoke in a way that was unlike anyone else. She didn't just clean the space, she seemed to see something beyond, to understand the subtleties that everyone else overlooked. As they talked, Ethan realized that, no matter how much he had been trained to view the world rationally, focused on numbers, success, and productivity, Sophia had a completely different view. To her, the world wasn't made of goals to be achieved or achievements to be displayed, but of moments to be lived and connections to be made. Ethan felt challenged. His life had always been governed by logic and control. He had built a wall around himself where the only thing that mattered was the result. But here, with Sophia, he began to question everything he thought was true. She was making him reconsider his worldview, and more than that, he began to feel that she was showing him a deeper, more meaningful path. Though she had never shown direct interest in Ethan, Sophia couldn't help but notice the change in him. Over the course of their conversations, she began to notice that, behind the facade of the successful businessman, there was a vulnerability he tried to hide. She felt that, in some way, he was searching for something more, something he didn't yet know how to reach. At first, Sophia felt uncomfortable with the attention she was receiving from Ethan. He was a man of power, someone who represented a completely different world from hers. She knew that, to him, she was just a maid. While she had a more humanized view of people, she didn't allow herself to fantasize about this sudden attention. Sophia knew her place, and the idea that Ethan could truly be interested in her seemed impossible. However, as their conversations became more frequent, she began to realize that what he was looking for wasn't the image of success he projected, but something more genuine, something he couldn't find in the world he lived in. Sophia began to see Ethan not just as the wealthy, influential businessman, but as a man searching for something deeper, something he didn't know he could attain. She, who had always kept a healthy distance from everyone, began to see Ethan's human side, and in that perception, she realized that, perhaps, he was just as lost as she was, but in a completely different context. The barriers she had thought existed between them started to dissolve, and for the first time, Sophia found herself seeing Ethan not as the powerful man everyone saw, but as someone with the same insecurities, the same fears, and the same need for connection. Ethan began to approach Sophia more intentionally, finding excuses to cross paths with her. In a casual conversation, he discovered that she wasn't just a maid, but a woman with a worldview that challenged everything he had believed. Meanwhile, Sophia, uncomfortable with the attention, started seeing the man behind the facade of power, realizing that despite the differences in their worlds, they were both, in some way, searching for something deeper. Will this meeting of such distinct worlds be able to transform their lives in an unexpected way? What does destiny have in store for them? As Ethan grew closer to Sophia, something inside him began to create resistances that he didn't know how to handle. He felt an increasing attraction for her, something far beyond mere curiosity. But with this desire also came deep, complicated fears. Ethan was raised in a world where social expectations were clear. Relationships were deeply tied to status, power, and social class. His family, friends, and colleagues expected him to associate with people who shared his lifestyle, his education, and, most importantly, his social position. The idea of becoming involved with someone from a lower social class, as he unconsciously saw Sophia, was almost unthinkable to him, not because he didn't value her, but because he knew it would put him in an uncomfortable position. The society he lived in wouldn't accept a romance between him and someone like Sophia. He could already imagine the comments, the judgmental looks, and the criticisms. His own fear of being ridiculed or even disapproved of by his family made him uneasy. Although the connection between them was genuine and intense, these social barriers were becoming an insurmountable obstacle. He tried to push these thoughts away, but each time he got close to Sophia, the insecurities returned with more force. He knew she had no idea about the internal struggle he was facing, but he also knew that to move forward, he would have to break free from the chains that held him to that narrow view of the world. While Ethan struggled with his own fears and prejudices, Sophia also faced insecurities, but of a different nature. Although she had begun to realize there was something real between them, she couldn't help but feel that it could all just be an illusion, a fantasy of a man who found himself bored with his perfect life and, for a moment, wanted to try something new and exciting. Sophia had always had clarity about her place in the world. She knew that, to Ethan, she was an employee, someone not on the same level as him, while a part of her wanted to believe in the possibility of something real between them. She couldn't ignore the fear of being just a temporary distraction, an adventure with no deeper commitments. After all, what could he want from someone like her? She didn't have the refined education that the women he associated with likely had, nor the sophisticated lifestyle he was accustomed to. This doubt began to eat away at Sophia's heart. She wondered if, deep down, he saw her as something more than just a simple woman, or if he was merely being swept away by a moment of weakness. She felt that he had more to offer, but also feared that by taking a step forward, she would end up in a painful situation with a broken heart. These fears kept her distant, even when he was near. Every time their eyes met, she wondered if he truly felt something for her, or if it was all just an experience he wanted to live without consequences. With the fears and doubts weighing on them both, the relationship between Ethan and Sophia began to drift apart. They, who had come so close, were now trapped in a cycle of insecurities and hesitation. Ethan, consumed by the fear of social rejection and family judgment, began to distance himself. He became colder and more distant, without offering clear explanations, but his actions spoke for themselves. He avoided the casual meetings he once sought, and when they crossed paths in the hallways, he could no longer look at her with the same sincerity. Sophia, in turn, also pulled away. She felt the change in Ethan's behavior, and although it hurt, she believed that the best thing for both of them was to move on. She didn't want to be a temporary distraction for him, let alone a source of shame or discomfort. She focused on her work again, keeping her emotional distance, but deep inside, a desire for something more real still lingered, like a shy flame that didn't completely go out. Both of them were now trapped in their own fears and emotional blockages, unable to move forward or open up to what they truly felt. What had once been a deep and promising connection was now stagnant, surrounded by silences and insecurities. The fear of social prejudice and internal blockages prevented Ethan and Sophia from moving forward in their relationship. The mutual attraction that had emerged between them was now hostage to the fears and insecurities they both carried. They were at an emotional impasse, each trapped in their own view of themselves and the world around them. What will it take for them to overcome these blockages and allow themselves to live what they truly want? And will the class difference, which seems to be an insurmountable obstacle, be overcome by something stronger? What does destiny have in store for them now that they are apart? Ethan's life was in a constant whirlwind of emotions. The insecurities that once separated him from Sophia were slowly dissipating, but the attraction he felt for her now came with a new weight, the revelation of who she truly was. Everything seemed about to change on an otherwise ordinary night when Ethan, in a casual conversation with a coworker, overheard something unexpected. Sophia's name came up casually, as if it were just another part of the company's daily routine. But suddenly, he heard a piece of information that left him shocked. A light, almost unnoticed comment mentioned the fact that Sophia was not just a maid, but had once been an heiress of a great fortune. She came from an influential family, known in high society, but fate, with its cruelty, had taken everything from her after a family scandal that destroyed her reputation and ruined her life. Ethan, stunned, could barely process the information. How could he have imagined that this woman, so simple and reserved, hid such a complex and painful history? He had always seen her as a humble woman, a simple employee, someone who wasn't on the same level as his social class. But now, he was confronted with a completely different reality. Sophia was not just a maid, she carried with her a past marked by deep losses and family traumas. With the revelation of Sophia's past, Ethan was forced to rethink everything he had believed about her. Before, he had seen her only as someone from the working class, someone who was on a different social level than his. But now, he realized that Sophia had been a woman of great status, someone who once had everything he now possessed: wealth, privileges, and the promise of a comfortable life. However, all of that was taken from her by something beyond her control. Ethan couldn't help but feel a twinge of shame when he realized how superficially he had judged her, considering her simple merely because of her occupation. He had always believed she lived in a world very different from his, but now he saw that she had been thrust into a cruel reality that, in some ways, mirrored his own internal struggle. She, like him, carried an emotional weight, but while he had fought to build his own fortune, she had seen hers crumble with no power to do anything about it. The discovery of this hidden past made Ethan question his own motivations and what had drawn him to Sophia from the start. He realized that over time he had been drawn to her humility and serenity, but also by a preconceived idea that she was simple and, in some way, unreachable for him. Now, he saw that she had a history of suffering and loss that connected her to him in an unexpected way. This made him realize that he was in love with someone far more complex than he had imagined, a woman who was not defined solely by her social position, but by the pain and struggle she carried within her. The truth about Sophia's past finally came to light, but not without great consequences. One night, after days of silence and distance between them, Sophia decided to open her heart to Ethan. They met in a quiet moment, away from the curious eyes of the company, and she, with contained sadness, began to tell her story. She spoke of the rich and powerful family she lost, of the fortune that was taken from her, and how the scandal made her be seen as a woman of no value. What destroyed her wasn't just the material loss, but the weight of public judgment and the isolation that came with it. Sophia told how hard it was to rebuild her life, how difficult it was to accept her new reality as an ordinary woman, without the luxury and comforts that had once been part of her life. The pain of that loss, of that transition, was still very fresh in her heart. Ethan listened intently, but at the same time felt a growing pressure in his chest. He didn't know how to react. What once seemed like an impossible romance between a maid and a rich businessman was now consumed by emotional complexity that he wasn't prepared to handle. Sophia's wounds made him realize that she wasn't just a woman to be admired for her simplicity, but someone with a past marked by suffering that he could barely comprehend. After the revelation, a silent barrier formed between them. Ethan, though deeply moved by Sophia's story, didn't know how to react. He was torn between the compassion he felt for her and the fear that the complexity of her story might be an insurmountable obstacle for their relationship. The fear of becoming emotionally involved with someone who carried so many wounds made him pull away, and Sophia, in turn, felt his distance. The bond that had begun to form between them was now threatened, and both found themselves at the mercy of their own fears and insecurities. The revelation of Sophia's past was a turning point in their relationship. What once seemed like a simple difference in social class now transformed into a story of pain and loss, a reality much deeper than Ethan had ever imagined. This new understanding of who she really was shook both of them, causing a temporary emotional distance as each dealt with their own issues. Can their relationship survive this revelation? Or are the wounds of Sophia's past too large for them to move forward together? What does the future hold for this bond that seemed unbreakable but is now marked by the complexity of the past? After the revelation about Sophia's past, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the suffering she had faced. He found himself confronted with his own life, his choices, and privileges. For the first time, the great fortune he possessed and the society surrounding him seemed to lose their meaning. He questioned what was more valuable: the security of his familiar world, with all its stability and status, or the possibility of building something new and genuine, free from the constraints of a predetermined life. Ethan knew that in order to truly love Sophia, he would have to give up everything his life had been up to that point. He no longer wanted to live in a bubble of privileges, where his happiness depended on appearances and superficial success. What he wanted now was something deeper, a true connection built on respect and equality. It was then, driven by the courage and sincerity of his love for her, that Ethan made a bold decision. He decided to offer Sophia a life that wouldn't be marked by the social barriers that had separated them until then. He would renounce what his family and society expected of him, leave behind the expectations and luxuries that had defined his existence, and propose something simple: the chance to build a life together where both of them would be equals, free to be who they truly were, without labels and without fear of judgment. It was a risky proposal, but he knew that he couldn't move forward without doing this. He wanted her to know that his intention was sincere, and that above all, he saw her as his partner, not as someone from a lower class, but as someone with whom he could build a true future. As Ethan planned what could be the biggest step of his life, Sophia found herself in a sea of doubts and insecurities. Although she felt the sincerity in Ethan's actions, she couldn't help but question his intentions. She was aware of her own place in the world and the differences between them, and the idea that Ethan might be seeking only something fleeting haunted her. Sophia feared being seen as merely a distraction, an object of desire for him, not someone he truly wanted to build a life with. The fear Sophia carried kept her from fully believing in Ethan's sincerity. She knew what he represented in society, and she couldn't help but wonder if he truly saw her as something more than just a simple experience, something he would indulge in out of curiosity and then leave behind. Sophia's past had taught her to be cautious, to protect her heart, and she didn't want to give herself to an illusion, especially with someone like Ethan, who could have any woman at his reach. It was in this moment of vulnerability that Sophia finally opened up. She shared her biggest fear with Ethan. "I don't want to be just an adventure for you. I don't want to be a woman you find to satisfy your curiosity and then just discard. I want to know if you truly see me, if you see me as the woman I am, and not as someone you can easily replace with another." Sophia's words resonated deeply with Ethan. He knew her distrust came from her pain and the scars she carried, and he couldn't blame her for that. But upon hearing those words, he understood that what she feared was, in part, a reflection of what he had yet to offer: security and truth. It was then that Ethan, with all his sincerity, decided to make the simplest and most genuine proposal of his life. He didn't need luxuries, grand gestures, or lofty words. He knew that the only thing that really mattered now was the sincerity of his heart. In a gesture without pomp or luxury, he invited her to the future he wanted to build beside her. "I'm no longer interested in my inheritance of privileges," he said, with a gentle smile. "What I want is to build something real, something that doesn't depend on what we have or how we are seen. I want to live with you, without labels, without society's judgments. I want us to be equals, without fear of giving ourselves to one another. What I feel for you goes beyond appearances, and I'm willing to build something real, something simple, but true." Ethan's words, spoken so honestly and without adornment, touched Sophia deeply. For the first time, she felt that he truly saw her, not as a woman of a lower class or a simple employee, but as a partner, as an equal. The trust she had doubted for so long now began to blossom. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she felt that with him by her side, Ethan was ready to live without society's chains, building a genuine love. Sophia, with a shy smile, stepped closer and said, "I can't promise that I won't have fears, but I can promise that I will try. If you're willing to walk beside me, without haste, without pressure, I'll be there too." The true decision to love was made in that simple, yet powerful moment. Ethan, renouncing his past and his inheritance of privileges, made a bold choice. He wanted to live a genuine love, free from social barriers and judgments. And Sophia, with her heart finally open, accepted Ethan's invitation to build a future where they would both be equals, without fear of living the truth of what they felt. Will this decision of love be enough to overcome all the challenges that may arise? What does the future hold for this couple who have finally chosen to live without fear of what others think? What will it take for them to stay united in the face of difficulties? The weight of social expectations and family judgments had been a constant barrier between Ethan and Sophia. But after much reflection, long conversations, and the personal growth they both went through, they finally came to the conclusion that the only way to move forward was to renounce everything that separated them. The life they had known up until then, with its norms and labels, no longer fit what they desired for themselves. Together, they made the decision to start a new life, free from the constraints of what society expected from them. They no longer needed masks, roles that defined them. They would live in their essence, without fear of what others thought, and face the challenges of a relationship outside the norms, without seeking approval from anyone but themselves. The path wouldn't be easy. They knew that the world around them still carried prejudices and expectations that would try to define their love. But, for the first time, they felt ready to face those challenges together. They committed to building something genuine, free from the chains of the past. And, looking into each other's eyes, they knew that no matter what the future held, what really mattered was what they felt and what they could create together. In the first days of this new life, something in Ethan began to change in a quiet yet profound way. He had always believed that happiness was tied to material success, wealth, and power. But now, with Sophia by his side, he realized that all of that had been an illusion. He began to find an inner peace he had never known before, a tranquility that didn't come from possessions or social prestige, but from genuine human connection. What he feared most, when opening up to Sophia and the idea of renouncing his old life, was that he would lose himself, that he would lose control. But instead, he felt a freedom he never imagined was possible. He no longer needed to define himself by what he owned, but by who he was and what he was becoming by her side. With each passing day, he felt more whole, more true. Ethan realized that what he truly wanted was no longer the shine of wealth, but something simpler, something deeper, a genuine connection with someone who understood him, who saw him beyond the facade he had built for himself. What he needed, he had already found: Sophia. For Sophia, the greatest challenge was always believing that someone would love her for who she truly was. She carried the weight of a past marked by loss and social judgment, and she thought the world only saw her through the lens of her social class, her position as a maid. She felt invisible, as if she could never be loved in her entirety, as a woman, as a human being, and not just as a reflection of what she had lost. But over time, with Ethan by her side, she began to realize that the true connection she had been seeking was not in who she was or what she had lost, but in what she had become throughout her journey. Ethan, contrary to everything she expected, didn't see her as someone from her past or from her class. He saw her in her entirety, with all her fears, dreams, and scars. He loved her not for her possessions or her appearance, but for who she truly was. And in that moment, Sophia finally understood. Their love, built on honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect, solidified in a way she had never imagined possible. They no longer needed titles, status, or social recognition. What they had in each other was enough, and she realized that was more than enough. The love between Ethan and Sophia overcame all the barriers that the world and society tried to impose on them. By surrendering to what truly mattered, the genuine human connection, they discovered that a person's true worth is not in what they have, but in who they are. They no longer needed masks, expectations, or titles. What they had in each other was more than enough to build a future together. And so, their love blossomed, not only as a story of overcoming, but as an example that when we free ourselves from appearances and judgments, we are able to find the true meaning of life and love. What did you learn from Ethan and Sophia's story? Is true love, indeed, about seeing beyond appearances? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of transformation, overcoming, and love, like the video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.